dear audience who are following us via YouTube, via streaming. I would like to introduce a very well-known person in the Chilean environment, but allow me in any case to introduce Professor Rüdiger Wolfrum, who is head of projects at the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law, and has been its founding and managing director until very recently. It is not easy to summarize his many achievements in just 1 or 2 minutes, but let me try. Among Professor Wolfrum's current and former offices, academic functions and projects are the following. He has been professor at the Faculty of Law of Heidelberg University. We are also very proud to say from the Heidelberg Center in Santiago de Chile that he was co-founder and director, together with the renowned Chilean jurist Professor Orrego Vicuña. He was co-founder and director, as I was saying, of the international LLM offered by Heidelberg University and the University of Chile here in Santiago. He was also director of the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and International Law based in Heidelberg. He was judge at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and president of the same tribunal for 4 years. He has been president of the German Research Foundation, of the Max Planck Society, of the German Society of International Law, and he's also member of a number of international councils and academies, such as the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and the Institut de Droit International. He has supervised many PhD students and some habilitationen, and of course, he's been academic guest to many universities worldwide. His many research areas include constitutional law, national and comparative, international law, environmental law, national as well as international, administrative law, the law of the sea, and human rights. He has numerous publications on international public and national and comparative public law. He's the editor of the Max Planck Encyclopedia of Public International Law, as well as the co-editor of the Max Planck Encyclopedia of Comparative Constitutional Law. What is very interesting to our current summer school on constitutional making processes is that Professor Wolfrum has intervened in high-impact knowledge transfer activities worldwide, whereby he has provided actors involved in constitutional processes with technical, juridical advice and qualification measures, for example, to establish working groups who would then be responsible for the development of constitution making, most prominently in countries such as Sudan, where he is now currently, South Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Chile. Concerning Chile, Professor Wolfrum is also a key participant in the Max Planck Foundation's work to lend support in a project funded by the German Federal Foreign Office to the constitution-making process by creating instances that bring together different stakeholders, for example, government, the judiciary, academics, and civil society organizations. And he offers assistance work to the Constitutional Convention, providing comparative legal research. I am sure he can give us further insights into this and many other projects during the next few days. So, as I said in the previous lesson, aprovechen aquí también el intercambio con el profesor Wolfrum. Tienen realmente a una eminencia ante ustedes. Many thanks again, Professor Wolfrum, for accompanying us, for sharing your knowledge, and the floor is now yours.
Muchas gracias for your very kind introduction. This is not what I consider brief, but be it as it may. Dear colleagues, some of you I see, I'm indeed speaking from Khartoum, where I'm sitting in a workshop with Sudanese, mostly political officials from the whole political spectrum in Sudan, and we are discussing a draft constitution which is federal, and it is so-called asymmetrical federal system. That is something particular, and we can, if you wish, I can answer questions on that later on. Today, I meant to discuss with you, and probably also in the following, constitutional examples where there is a reference to the economic order. I group these into the following. Every kind of that grouping is kind of primitive, if you wish, but it gives you an idea. There are constitutions which refer directly to the free market system. I come to them. There are constitutions which say nothing about this issue. That's a majority. Then we have constitutions which refer to the social market or a socially organized market. And we have mixed systems. And finally, we have systems which belong to the planned economy. When I do this, I should warn you, there is no constitution pure, to speak. And secondly, constitutions are living instruments, and therefore they change over time due to the practice. This is not a breach of the Constitution. All constitutions are tailored so that they can be progressively developed. That I will explain in a moment. Now, to be a bit more concrete. The constitutions which refer to the free market system are, for example, I don't provide you with a full list. For example, the Constitution of Albania from 1998, revised in 2016. Its Article 11 reads in the English translation, the economic system of the Republic of Albania is based on private and public property, as well as on a market economy and on freedom of economic activity. That's a rather pure and simple, although each of these words are open for interpretation. What means market economy? But I'll give you an assistance in that respect. The Constitution of Serbia of 2006 reads, economic systems in the Republic of Serbia will be based on a market economy, open and free market, freedom of entrepreneurship, independence of business entities, and equality of private and other types of assets. Well, that's a little bit more flesh on the bones, as you can see, the freedom of entrepreneurship and independence of business entities adds to what has been said later, I must emphasize, in Albania. The Constitution of Angola, I'm sorry, I'm jumping across the globe, from 2010, says in Article 89, the organization and regulation of economic activities shall be based on a general guarantee. Whenever we lawyers say general, that means there must be exceptions, of overall. That's also something which softens what is following, economic rights and freedoms in general, and an appreciation of work, human dignity, and social justice, in accordance with the following fundamental principles. A, the role of the state as a regulator of the economy and coordinator of balanced national economic development under the terms of the Constitution and the law. And C, a market economy based on the principles and values of healthy competition. That's interesting to put it this way. Morality and ethics as prescribed and ensured by law. The last four words are rather strange. I've never heard that ethics are prescribed by law. Ethics is something else. But be it as it may, morality and ethics, to mention both side by side, is equally strange, for we don't normally distinguish between moral and ethics. But that's what the Constitution of Angola decided to have. Now, what do you read from that? Different to the context of the Constitution thereafter, there is an indication that a particular model is to be followed. That is the free market model. What does that mean? The free market model means that the economy is, so to speak, guided or constructed by the actors in the market. If, let's say, today in Germany, you sell a kilo of cherries, cherries are always quite expensive, and after the heavy rain, you can't sell many cherries, for mostly they're gone, the price goes up. If, however, after a good harvest of wheat, the price goes down. Therefore, you have the offer and the demand. In the moment in Germany, the prices for timber go up significantly, this year already by 40%, due to the shortage of timber for buildings. Why do we have that shortage? Many people build, and due to the protection of the forests, very limited amount of timber is being produced. Therefore, we artificially reduce the offer of timber. We have the demand on timber, which is created by the market. The result is a high price for timber. As I said, 40%, which means that young couples cannot afford to build a house anymore. And at the same time, the prices for apartments go up. This is a quite vicious circle, but this is a vicious circle as it is being created by the market economy. Don't believe or take my words now that I'm against the market economy. It's something you will see soon. You will soon see the alternatives are not much better. Let me take it at this point. I will later go into the constitutions. What are the small screws through which you can influence the economy without saying something in principle about whether it is market-oriented? Let me now come to my second model. The Constitution says nothing. What do you make out of it? Chile has that kind of a constitution, but the typology I'm using here is the United States. I will not speak too much about Chile. Otherwise, people will believe I'm somehow biased. The US has practically no reference to economy, except the freedom of interstate trade. That's all. Therefore, you can export from Virginia to Kentucky. And there is no possibility to limit this export, actually, in theory. If you have ever been in the United States and you would have tried to enter the state of Oregon, and you have one apple with you, then you have a big problem. For Oregon is fearing certain diseases on fruit, and for that reason, the borders are not open for the free trade. And Oregon, to a certain extent, the same is being done by California, protect their fruit against import, which may be poisoned or if infected or whatever you may call that. But you can hardly say that the United States is totally free. Particularly in the United States, you have a strong development against monopolies. And the monopoly is the opposite to a free market economy. For if you would allow the development of monopolies, then at the end of the day, some big companies would, so to speak, control everything. They would kill by underpricing the smaller ones and force them into selling the entity. Therefore, the US is, if you only look into the Constitution, a kind of free market economy. But if you look into the realities, it is not. Therefore, when you want to judge what is an economy in its typology, then you better also take into account the legal system which is being based upon the Constitution. Sure, in the US state or the free market system, the state, if that state intervenes, has a certain problem in justifying the intervention. Therefore, the state has to explain, or as I said, justify that such and such intervention is necessary. In the other forms of economy, it's the other way around, but we'll come to that. Let me therefore come to an economy which is perhaps of interest to Chile. That is an economy which I would say is a mixed economy. The economic system of Ecuador follows this concept. The Constitution has been adopted in 2008, but the significant changes have been done thereafter. The last change has been done in 2021. It reads, the economic system shall be comprised of public, private, mixed economy, grassroots solidarity forms of economic organization, and others as established by the Constitution. The grassroots solidarity economy shall be regulated pursuant to the law and shall include cooperative, associative, and community sectors. I wonder whether you know what that means. The ordinary law student would not. Now I take my examples from Germany, although Germany is not a mixed system. We have this kind of what they call cooperatives, grassroots solidarity, quite significantly. These are, if you have ever been in Germany, are in particular cooperatives such as Raiffeisen. What does that mean? Raiffeisen is an institution organized by farmers or the producers of vegetables in gardens. They purchase the products and they distribute the products inside the country or in the region, or with grain. That is important. They store the grain. All production, agricultural production, follows certain cycles, or at least the ones in the Chilean as well as the European hemisphere. There are other parts of the world where this doesn't apply. We have one, maximum 2 harvests per year in grain. In the moment, if you now come to Germany, the first wheat is being cut. What happens? The wheat price goes down significantly. When at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, wheat will be put on the fields again, for sure, the price of wheat is much, much higher. And the poor farmer who can't keep the wheat has to sell cheap and purchase most expensively. This is to a certain extent ameliorated by this Raiffeisen and similar cooperatives. We have the same system in international law for the so-called commodity agreements. Commodity agreements exist or existed for sugar, wheat, timber, tropical timber, I better say, and so on, and for certain minerals. This is the possibility to equalize the peak in the price with the peak in the low peak in the other side, to give the producer a rather steady income. This is a matter of self-organization. Therefore, Ecuador calls that a grassroots solidarity economy. By the way, this system has been developed, as I said, in Germany by Raiffeisen in the 19th century, and is an element or an institution which is being sold in the world. For example, this system has been adopted by Togo, Rwanda, Burundi. These are the ones which I know. Now, you may say that's typical. These were all former German colonies, but I may appease you. The introduction of this system has been done only in the 20th century. Maria Teresa, you are listening to something which is not law of the sea. I'm fascinated.
I'm interested in your teaching, Professor. Yes.
Very good. Okay, this is a small explanation for the Constitution of Ecuador. And the whole chapter 4 of the Constitution of Ecuador is only dealing with economic matters. Those in Chile who are interested in these issues should have a look at it. Equally interesting is, by the way, the system in Bolivia. Let me come to another system, which I didn't mention at the beginning, for the reason it is a little bit out of, so to speak, the tradition. It's a sui generis system, which always means I can't explain how it works at all. Is the Constitution of Indonesia, namely, it reads, the economy shall be organized as a common endeavor based upon the principles of the family system. And then it continues, the organization of the national economy shall be conducted on the basis of economic democracy, upholding the principles of togetherness, efficiency with justice, continuity, environmental perspective, self-sufficiency in keeping a balance in the progress and the unity of the national economy. It's an interesting way of putting it. Now, be careful before you are tempted to copy it. For Indonesia is a tropical country with no seasonal differences. And there you can harvest cacao beans, grow every year, all over the year, etc. And therefore, there's this different system. And if you go into the island system of Indonesia, you will easily find out that the families do work in the rice fields, in the growing of cacao beans, etc. Let me move on to the next one, is a social economy system, which we have under the German system. The German system provides the constitution that Germany is a social state, full stop. Apart from that, it's rule of law, a democracy, but also a social state. This is extremely important and extremely relevant. Look into the portfolio of the German ministries. The German Ministry on Social Affairs is, in the moment, covering 2/5 of the whole German budget. It is much, much, much more than what we spend on defense or anything else. That is quite interesting, for we have only this word. It's a social state. What has happened? This provision you find in Article 20, and as a lawyer, I would classify this provision as a principle. What does a principle in a constitution mean? It means that the legislature, the judiciary, and in particular the executive, have to live up to the implementation of this system. Now, this is, you could realize, or the relevance of that during the pandemic. Germany has a rather strict budgetary system. We have a rule, it's the same as the EU, what we call the budget break. You can't go exceed the budget, the increase of the budget is limited. This is a constitutional provision introduced, I believe, 2 years ago, directly after the financial crisis. This has been lifted. And therefore, Germany has taken up debts in an enormous amount. I'm not particularly good at figures, but it will take us generations to pay back these debts. It was easier for Germany than for anybody else, for Germany has a very low debt basis, and therefore it could afford it. And in the moment, money is cheap, and therefore Germany has even paid off former debts and taken new ones to pay less income tax. Not interest, I mean. Okay. And finally, I have two further systems. The so-called economy, which is influenced by social considerations. It's not the same. I will report to you Article 55, paragraph 1 of the Constitution of Slovakia, revised from 1992, revised in 2017. It says briefly, the economy of the Slovak Republic is based on the principles of a socially and ecologically oriented market economy. That's quite a mouthful. A socially and ecologically oriented market economy. There's this combination of environment and market and market economy and, so to speak, greening the economy. I'll come to the consequences of that. So far, I've described to you only, nothing more, what the Constitution says. But please believe me, as a constitutional lawyer, you should not only explain what you find in the Constitution, you should also look what is missing. Let me use Germany. Germany has a Bill of Rights protecting or guaranteeing the civil and political rights. But it does not reflect the basic laws, the German Grundgesetz does not reflect the economic and social rights. We have in Germany no right to labor, no right to health, no right to social security, and whatsoever. Now you believe I'm totally crazy, I assume, since I have mentioned the huge budget of the Ministry for Social Affairs. This does not depend upon social rights. But why do we have social rights? The following. Social rights are individual rights, and they can be, in many cases, claimed. Therefore, you have an individual which may claim social rights. Actually, in Germany, we have social courts. They do nothing but deal with social rights. Also, the courts on administrative matters deal with social rights. The split I will not explain to you. It is, first of all, has been changed recently, and secondly, it's not very logical anyway. But you can bring a lawsuit against the government for not living up to your social rights. Therefore, it's an easier access to court, but it does not guarantee that the laws provide you for what you want to have. For example, under our legal system in Germany, the aids given to people who are born blind or have suffered an accident and became blind are 100%. This is quite far-reaching. I once had a personal assistant. She was born blind. I nevertheless decided to engage her, and the executive paid a couple of 10,000 euro to the Max Planck Institute for providing her with a computer which she, as a blind person, could use. She used the script or the writing of the Braille. And when I asked her to do a literature research, she did it at the same time and as accurate as anybody else in the Institute. It was very funny. The Institute was at the beginning slightly upset to have somebody like that. Everybody thought she would be an extra burden. It was not the case. And some people were afraid of the dog she had. It was quite a big dog. And not everybody likes dogs, but it was a very friendly dog. And she had, for her convenience, a room on the ground floor level, and so that she didn't have to do too much escalators. And I was sitting in the second floor. She told the dog, I want to see Professor Wolfrum, and the dog climbed up 2 staircases and went to my room. Totally feasible. She did roller skating, and she was the person who had the social life brought to a maximum in the Max Planck Institute. It was an enrichment, and she did, I hope I don't step on the feet of anybody of you, a dissertation on a complicated legal issue. Within 3 years, and got a grade summa cum laude. Quite something. She is now a high-ranking public official in the Ministry of, I believe, Hessen. But due to the new standards developed by the International Convention on the Protection of Handicapped People, the status of handicapped has been significantly improved. And if anybody of you want to read something extremely modern for the help and assistance of handicaps, I recommend to you, you read this convention. And if you are capable of reading German, you could also look into the legislation of Hessen. Hessen has transformed this convention into German law by 100%. Actually, we did, the Max Planck Foundation was helping Hessen in this respect. Therefore, you have a very interesting development. There you see also the difference between human rights, the political and civil rights, which mostly mean stop to the state, don't do that. Whereas in respect of social rights, you have to live up to certain commitments. But I believe I made my point in this respect. Now, let me come to the next point, the planned economy. We have a couple of states still following a planned economy. This is in particular China. It used to be the Soviet Union, and it is not anymore the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union has given up the planned economy, and the GDR had to give it up. But the planned economy is still very much in the brains of some people. It is an economy which was thought by Karl Marx that this should be the right economy. I'm not so sure this is correct. One should look into the psychology of people. Mostly people work and work harder if they have a personal gain. People are not very much inclined to work for the public. Therefore, the Soviet Union created the hero of work, the Stakhanov syndrome. But what was that in reality? Mr. Stakhanov was such a hero, but he had 15 people who assisted him. He was coal mining. And all this was, so to speak, considered his work, although the others helped him, and therefore he was considered a hero on labor. This was the incentive system which the Soviet Union had produced. In China, this has never been done this way. China, in his planned economy, as far as I can see it, I've been frequently in China, but sure, I was not in the economic sector. But I give you an example. China has other incentives in the moment, and Chinese, you know, work very hard. I was in the tea area of China, and there I could see and watch the tea production. Tea production is quite complicated. You have the green tea, as you know, and you have the roasted tea, femme. And apart from that, tea has to be fermented. Now, when the tea comes out of the drum where it has been heated, it's been put on a table, and there are men and women, in my case, it were only elderly women, who sort out the debris from the tea. Now, how do you control them? You can't look into everything they are doing. These are small bits and pieces. And these fabrication installations I've seen all followed the same system. The more debris the women produced, the better they were paid. It's a little bit, I was a little bit astonished, first, to have such a system in China, and secondly, the way how it was being done, but it worked perfectly well. The tea from these was worldwide well-known quality. 100 grams of some of the better tea, not the best tea, was costing 100 grams, more than $200. You can believe me, that is quite a significant price. Therefore, but you have a planned economy. Now, the others have no plans. We pretend this is the case. This is totally incorrect. Sure, we also have, also in Germany, planning elements. You can't erect a factory wherever you like. We have a very strict zoning law in Germany, zoning and planning. And there are zones where only houses can be built for living. Then there is a mixed system where there is a small business and kindergarten, everything which is a little bit noisy or what you need for the direct needs of the population. Also lawyers, attorneys' offices are allowed there. And then we have the Gewerbegebiet, and the industrialized Gebiet. The Gewerbegebiet has bigger industrialized entities, but not the real big ones like the big chemistry enterprise, etc. And for each of these zones, a planning takes place, and you can build in this zone only. You can't put something outside these zones. This is a system which is typical for Germany, but doesn't exist in other countries, not even in European countries. Just a joke. In France, they don't have that, except in Alsace, where they have kept it after the period when Alsace was a German directly between 1871 and the First World War. Therefore, we have a planning element. And the other planning element in this respect is the planning is the business of the municipalities. If the municipalities offer a good bargain as far as water, electricity, access, etc. is concerned, they get into a competition with other municipalities on attracting industry. Now, you should also look into the tax system. The tax for this kind of business, smaller economy, industrialized taxes like a gas station or something, or car repairs, etc., the taxes go to the municipalities. Therefore, municipalities who have done that well have become rich. Other municipalities have not become rich, for they preserved their space for, let's say, parks and whatsoever, and they are now very poor. Therefore, if you look into that, Germany considers itself more market economy oriented, but it's not true. In the reality, we have a strong element in planning. Particularly true is this in respect when building nuclear power plants. We don't have ours go out of the business. And if you develop a system of processing garbage or depositing garbage, Once upon a time, I was a judge in the administrative courts, and I was responsible on garbage. I can tell you what you come across is unbelievable. How people handle garbage and what you have to take into consideration when some garbage deposit is being accepted. Therefore, what I wanted to explain to you, the Constitution is a starting point, right? It's an important starting point, but what comes later is a question of the legislation and what the executive makes out of it. I believe that is so far the first element I wanted to speak about, and I can continue a bit. I want to give you ample time for discussion, for so far I've been a little bit, let's say, abstract, and you perhaps want to know more about it. But let me explain one key element in an economy system. The element is property. What does property mean? Property means that an individual has the full control over this, what is owned by that person. For example, it means that the individual can choose to dispose of his or her property. Let's assume you have a famous cupboard from the Baroque period done by Röttgen. That's one of the most famous producers in the 18th century, and you put it on the garbage. Are you allowed to do that? The answer is yes, you can do that. It is, you are the owner and you can handle your property freely. You can sell it, you can destroy it, or you can use it. Is it so? Totally. Under the German system, Article 14, it's being said, and I quote, I will say it first in German, Eigentum verpflichtet. Property comes with a responsibility. And secondly, its use should serve the community. Therefore, you have a social component in using your property. This is rather typical for Germany, which is, as I said, a social welfare state. Now, what does that mean in reality? It means that you cannot do with your property as you like it. You can, let's say, with a pot or a cup, your dog doesn't like to listen, I believe. Nice corgi, I believe. Then the property, if it is of any interest to the community, then you have certain responsibilities. For example, you are so happy to own a painting from, let's say, Dürer, German painter of the Renaissance period. Are you allowed to destroy it? No. Are you allowed to export it? No. You can sell it, but you can't export it. There are many cases pending in German courts where people want to send something which is of value to Christie's or Sotheby's in London for the auctioning. And it's always a big fight whether this is possible or not, whether the particular object is of historical relevance for the identity or the history of Germany. That is one thing. Now, let's go a step further. Let's assume you belong to the family of the Princess of Löwenstein, not a very famous family of princes. They had their small region on the Main, and you are the owner of a beautiful castle, probably built in the Renaissance period. What can you do with this? Actually, such a castle is now mostly a burden, but anything else. We recently had one of these castles in the Neckar Valley, which was sold by the owner. It was totally intact, beautiful building. The roofs were intact, and he sold that for €1 to the state of Hessen, for he saw the repairs coming, and his income of this count was not significant, and he didn't want to pay for this, which he had to do. You're forced to do the renovation on your own account. Therefore, this is a social component of property, of private property. Now, there are other forms of property, paintings, castles, porcelain, or whatsoever, chinaware, or whatsoever. What is if you own a mining entity? Here you must take into account that the mining systems are totally different in the world. In the United Kingdom, everything which is underground belongs to the Queen or the King, as the case may be. It's not private property. The same system applies in the whole Latin America. In this case, the state is the owner of these minerals. But you can apply for a license, and then you can do the exploration and the exploitation under certain conditions and whatsoever. That's fine. In Germany, the private owner of the piece of land is also the owner of the minerals. But the difference is rather limited. Still, if you want to do mining, even if the owner wants to do mining, he needs a license. Not for the reason that the state is the owner of the minerals, but that there are certain environmental standards to be taken into account, etc., etc. Therefore, at the end of the day, you need a license. However, under the system of Germany, to take away this license is less easy than in the case of Latin America, where the license, or in England, where the license is a license to use public property, so to speak. This again has a significant influence also on the economic system of the state. You don't find that reflection in the Constitution. Now we have certain countries, and when I was introduced, you were told that I have been frequently in Mongolia. In Mongolia, the land belongs in total to the state. There's no private ownership on the land. This is very important for Mongolia, for the grassland is open to everybody, and you don't need a license to establish your tent, the yurte, as we say, or the ger, if you speak Mongolian. Every person has a right to set up a tent in the Mongolian grassland. They changed the system a little bit for Ulaanbaatar is the capital. There is private ownership for the land, so to build. Now, Mongolia is unfortunately extremely rich in natural resources. It has copper, uranium, gold, coal. The most important piece is copper. But the Mongolian religion, it's a Buddhist religion, says you should not hurt Mother Earth. This has nothing to do with Buddhism. That's the old shaman system. Even to drill a hole of 20 centimeters, you need to sacrifice something to Mother Earth, to pray for forgiveness, etc. Now, the Americans and the Canadians, Australians wanted to do open pit gold mining. This is the utmost offense to the belief, the culture of Mongolia. The last two governments of Mongolia fell over these issues. But what I wanted to explain here, that the grassland is open for everybody, is part of the constitution. They have a constitution which is, by the way, rather similar to the German one. But that you should not hurt Mother Earth is a cultural element. And to what extent this is a limitation to the economic activities has to be balanced. That is a problem. Okay. Now I have explained to you some elements of our economic system looked upon from the Constitution. And I think it's now time that you shake yourself as if you have snow on your shoulders and raise questions. Yes, Heidelberg.
Hi, Professor Wolfrum. A pleasure, and thank you very much for your amazing lecture. Really interesting. I think that is a really interesting topic and important, especially for us from Latin America, and that we have several kinds of constitutions and several issues regarding property rights. And I have a question, maybe it's a simple question, but that happened in my country several years ago. I'm from Venezuela. Taking into account the social component of the property right, and taking into account that, for example, in Venezuela, we have a constitution with a social economy model with free trade. Do you think that, for example, an expropriation of a farm for create a cooperative or for being taken by cooperative should be considered into the social component of the property right? Would be in the same topic?
Yes, this question is fully, fits fully into this class or workshop, but I wanted to talk about expropriation next time. Nevertheless, I will explain to you.
Sorry.
Expropriation, the protection of private property, is part and parcel of many constitutions. But it is not sacrosanct. You can expropriate. And now you must distinguish between the international level and the national level. According to the international level, this is now questions dealt with controversial, the expropriation has to be compensated. Or first, I should start differently. Expropriation is only allowed to serve public means and should be fully compensated. And what is equally under international law the case, full and compensation and at once compensation, not in 10 years or 20 years. This, however, is a question on the international level whether this is being acceptable. Under the Allende system, this question was quite virulent, and it is still the question when the expropriation of farms in South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe are concerned. There, the question of prompt compensation is an issue, mostly on the basis how these people, so to speak, gained the property. They often gained the property by means which were, let me say, typical colonial. Maybe fraud, maybe force, or the combination thereof. But let me talk about that later and more in detail to put it in, but I didn't want to let you alone with this question.
Thank you.
Laura?
Yes. Hi, Professor. I am Laura from Mexico,
Yes.
and I have a question. It was not clear for me. It was not clear to me what you mentioned about Mongolia. You said there was a public property, so that means no one needs to apply for a license to exploit the resources. So anyone can just
No.
take the
resources, that's too general. Then I have expressed myself. You can build your tent, and you can have sheep, camel, perhaps goats, and yes, and cows. You can't dig the earth. The earth, for that you need a license.
Okay, so could you give us some examples of, I don't know, for example, can you own land?
No.
Or
you don't own the grassland. You
okay.
go more into detail. In the summer, you can roam easily in the grassland. Don't forget, Mongolia is 5 times the size of Germany, with 7 million inhabitants. It's the thinnest populated area of the world. Even I was offered a place for a tent, and I was already considering purchasing sheep and goats, horses. My wife was against camels, etc.
Okay, thank you.
If you have time, travel Mongolia. It's a wonderful place. And when you travel, the roads are miserable. But if you use a 4-wheel truck, then you will manage. But it's a country where you can drive for 3 days without seeing one single person. But what you see is plenty of sheep, goat, whatsoever.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else? Lindra?
Yeah, Alexandra. Yeah.
Lindra, sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Wolfram, for your lecture. I have a question about if you want to combine different types of economy, what can be the difficulties, the problems of when you combine different rules of the market, rules of the planned market? So for a country, when you try to combine different types of, which one are the problems that you confront?
Yes. The planned economy works as follows. There is a production target set. You should produce whatsoever. I'll give you an example. It's in such and such amount. In Russia, we had one classical example. There was a target set for light bulbs, and they should produce, the figure was not the amount of light bulbs, but the figure was on the watt they would produce, the strength, the capacity of light bulb. Now, the production of a big light bulb, a strong light bulb, is as expensive and work intensive as a small one. If you have 1,000 watt, it's easier to produce them than 100. The production was all these big light bulbs nobody was using. It's the same what happened in Russia. You produce nails. You should produce as many tons of nails. What you produce are big nails. You don't care to produce small ones, for otherwise you will never achieve the target. Therefore, the planning, even if no mistakes are being done, then it is how it is being implemented makes the life rather complicated. Apart from that, predictions are absolutely uncertain. You must have a prognosis. What do we need within the next 2 years? If you would have said, produce a vaccine against Corona 10 years ago, the pharma industry would have said, you are crazy. Why should I produce that? However, when we had the pandemic situation, the initiative of the industry was, in competition, by the way, to produce such a vaccine. As you can see, in Germany, it was successful. Most, not all. One of the best firm producing vaccines was unsuccessful, the one in Tübingen. And in France, one producer also was unsuccessful, although the EU Commission has purchased this vaccine before it was on the market, which was quite kind of a disaster. Therefore, planning is, economy very often produces, or mostly produces, goods for the human consumption or need or whatsoever. And this is to look into the future, what is going to be needed, is very complicated. Sure, we have a certain idea how much milk is needed for every day, or how much bread is needed. But the market is very able to produce exactly that. You know, Germany is a state with a lot of bakeries. But if you go into a bakery in the moment, let's say at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you will see very limited amount of bread and certainly few, if anything, on bakery. Each baker knows exactly how much he or she will sell within a day. For the next day, you can't sell the same. For you can't, a roll which is 1 day old in Germany doesn't sell anymore. Therefore, you have the balancing factor, and the bakers also take into account that there is a vacation period. The Germans are in Greece and Turkey or whatsoever, therefore they produce less. For that, you don't need a bureaucrat to do the planning. We need a certain amount of planning on certain goods, and there we have a planning when it comes to electricity, when it comes to the water supply, very much so. There, we need a certain planning capacity. But you can see that Germany has not planned in this respect. When we had the Fukushima disaster, Angela Merkel, the prime minister, decided to cut down on atomic energy. End of the story. And she did never waver in this respect. She is a physicist, she knows about the dangers. In the moment, she's haunted by that decision for the lack of nuclear energy and the shutting down for reasons of climate protection of the coal, our major supplier, has reduced our energy, while the consumption with the cars who use electromotors go up. And here you see not the proper planning, but the opposite of proper planning. What we do in the moment, we ourselves shut down on atomic energy, but live on the atomic energy from France, which is kind of, let me put it this mildly, illogical. Therefore, most states, except perhaps China, have given up on planning. For the demands are so diverse that this cannot be reflected in a planning system. You seem to be all very young. Do you know what you are going to dress, how you are going to dress tomorrow morning or 2 days later? If you are planning, you should accept that you know how to do that. Even I don't know which tie I will put on tomorrow morning. Other questions? I saw somebody else. I don't see perhaps everybody.
Hi, I have one question.
Hannah? Is that a question?
Well, first of all, thank you for your intervention, which I found very interesting, especially when I think about the situation in my country, Mexico, and all the states that are in a vulnerable political economic situation. But it also makes me think about the world situation in terms of global warming. So this is my question. Do you think that at some point the economic order will evolve to a model that really cares about reversing or slowing down climate change?
Yes, I believe, but since you have perhaps seen my CV, I belong to this group of environmentalists for sure. Therefore, I must believe in that. But it should be developed with a certain amount of sensitivity, and industry should also be encouraged to provide sustainable solutions. And finally, please don't forget, if a state like Chile or a state like Mexico is totally in line with all the rules on climate concerning climate change, how much influence does this have on the world climate? You know? Probably not even 6%. This is not an excuse, but it is a plaidoyer to do things together. For example, Germany is shutting down in the moment its coal industry, totally. First the black coal, and next the brown coal. In the same moment, the Czech Republic is opening new coal mines, huge ones. This doesn't make really sense. Therefore, it should have been, both in the European Union, it should have been that we both closed down coal mining. China is also significantly engaging in coal. Therefore, China is one of the major producers of CO2. That is one criticism from my side. The other criticism from my side is we have a certain amount of tools for protecting against CO2, but some tools are not being used. For example, in California, there are the first initiatives to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. That's feasible. It can be used in certain processes, and it can be stored. In Germany, both is prohibited. For in Germany, it's not only the protection of the climate, that's what they say. It is a change of our system, of our lifestyle. And under the, so to speak, code of protecting the climate. Therefore, it would be better if we coordinate our efforts, but this is rather complicated, I agree. But in principle, it is feasible and should be done.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Professor. My name is Camila. I have a question. Would you suggest to involve the environment in some sort of way in a constitution? Like, would it be wise to address it somehow? Or is it better to just keep it outside from it?
No, thank you for that question. I would say yes, include it for two reasons. The one you may consider cynical. It will be used, included in many issues. I will explain which ones, whether it's in the Constitution or whether it's not. And therefore it's better it is in the Constitution so that we get a proper basis for that. You may have seen, heard, or you may have not. I assume you live in Chile. That's the German Constitutional Court, and you perhaps know that Germany is not governed by the government, but by the Constitutional Court, has decided that an individual has a right to bring a claim against the government so that the government ensures that future generations, even the generation beyond the generation of the claimant, is protected against climate change. Where they took that from, it's a rather liberal interpretation of the German Constitution, which says protection of the environment. What I believe, it would have been much, much better if we had not just this floating principle, but had it more specifically done and explained what is the consequences thereof. You see my point? The second point is, still to the first point, there is a judgment of the Appeal Court of Amsterdam on the same issue, and therefore we are entering into a phase in legal developments where most things are individualized. Therefore, individuals can bring a claim for environmental reasons. Let me explain what I mean. If you look into the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, there's no right for water. It's not established in this covenant. Nevertheless, the treaty body, the committee, has decided that the right of water is part and parcel of that covenant, although there's no word in it, and derived it from the right to life, etc. We will all agree that water is necessary to live. Water for drinking, but also for sanitary reasons. Now, we have an established right to water as an individual right. Now, NGOs use this right to water as established by in the covenant to enforce the environmental standards on the protection of water, surface and subsurface water. There's no word in these international treaties but they use the human right of water to enforce environmental standards. And this is what I refer to as an individualization, creation of new claimant positions. And if we want to be run by judges, and most of my life I have been a judge, still I believe this should be decided by the parliaments and the government and not by the judges. And therefore, a strange argument. You would have expected a different argument, but this is a positivistic argument, if you wish to put it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Something else?
There's a question by Sergio Miranda.
Yes.
I'm listening.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your lecture, Professor. I have a question. I remember you said that within the German Constitution, there's a presence of social rights, right? Now, I want to ask you whether you advise countries in Latin America in the context of poverty that we are facing to state social and economic rights in their constitutions, because sometimes these rights will be impossible to guard, to protect. So I wonder if you have the opinion to insert these rights in constitutions, or maybe just leave these rights to other legal measures, not on the constitutional level. Well, that's my question.
Yes, I take the right to labor. The right to labor, a very common economic right. How do you implement such a right if most of the industry or the producing part of a country is in private ownership? As you all know, basic rights are rights against the state, not more. What does that mean in respect of the right to labor? That the state should promote full employment. That can be done by fostering the economy. In the case of the pandemic, Germany, in this respect, Germany did more than any other country since we have these means. We produced what we say short labor. The short labor means these people only worked for, let's say, 10% or even less. They got this part of their salary, but additionally from the government, the remaining part, roughly 10% were deducted. Therefore, at the end of the day, the industry paid a part, a small part, and the rest was paid by the government. But the advantage was they didn't lose a job. They were still employed. But this is a very typical system which does exist in Europe, at least only in Germany. The advantage of this system is that, first of all, it protects the right to labor, although we don't have that right. And secondly, it is much cheaper than kicking people out, paying social benefits, and bringing people back again, etc., etc. in the moment, although the pandemic is not yet over, the short labor, the figure has been reduced significantly already since the people are already back in the job. It's just a simple transition period. And therefore it pays off very nicely. The industry is happy, the laborers are happy, and the return to the functioning of the industry worked well. Therefore, the right to labor you can have in the constitution, but you must be aware that the government cannot produce the labor. It can only develop incentives so that people have labor. But, and now comes a but, it also works the other way around. Some political parties want, in the moment after the pandemic, the huge debts we are having, to higher the taxes for the industry. The industry, however, says, if you hire the taxes, we move out of Germany. Germany has, in the moment, some of the highest industry taxes in the world. Therefore, if the taxes go up too much, then the industry moves out, and then there's no labor. You reach, although this is an idea from the communists and some parts of the SPD, this would be against the right to labor, although it's meant to be a social element. You understand? It sounds cynical, but you have to look into the whole economic system to see what the right of labor can achieve and cannot achieve. The right to a clean environment is something else. We have that right in some countries, and I'm totally in favor to bring it in. The right to a clean environment. If we have a student festival in Heidelberg, we have plenty of student festivals in Heidelberg, on the border of the Neckar, thereafter this place looks like a garbage system. If you have a right to a clean environment, you have also an obligation to clean the environment. Therefore, it could be also used the other way around. It doesn't mean that the administration has to do the cleaning, you have to do the cleaning. And if you look into the right to an environment in Baden-Württemberg, we are particularly keen on that. For example, we have a protection of the environment, but you are not allowed to cut your trees if they have reached a certain size before the beginning of winter, so that no birds lose their nest. You see, you have a right, but it's more what you feel is the obligation. Finally, there is one element which is not being considered much. We have a strong tendency in developing a compensation for environmental damages. There are a couple of new judgments on this respect. And I remember a case roughly 40 years ago. There was a meadow which was rather wet, and one person who was not the owner of the meadow in summer walked across this wet meadow and decided this was very helpful for him. And then the administration decided that this meadow was too wet and put in a drainage system, and he argued, I can't walk this meadow with bare feet, and therefore I don't have the equivalent to a Kneippkur, and therefore I need compensation. No way. If that case would come up today, I'm not totally sure how the decision will be. It may be now a compensation case, but don't look upon compensation as a means to gain money. That's not the point. It is an enforcement system, environmental or compensation for environmental damage means you enforce the environmental standards. If you are from Chile, I want to please you. Have you looked into the Antarctic Treaty System? Perhaps not. There's a protocol to the Antarctic Treaty. And there is an annex on environmental liability. Look into that, and there you see, I'm not satisfied with it, but it's good. For the beginning, it's a decent start. Environmental liability is an enforcement mechanism that in cases of environmental emergency, I wanted it for every emergency defect, the producer of this damage has to do a full cleanup. Oil spill means a full cleanup. And if you don't do it, then somebody else can do it for you and claim compensation from you. That's a tough system. Believe me, it works. But please look upon that as first, as a sanction, and what is even more important, as a means to preclude environmental damages. Look, if you have to face that this will cost you in the cleanup a couple of million, you will be very careful. To give you another example, laws, you know, if you have ever been on a ship, under the machines there's some debris, oil, and whatsoever. This used to be pumped out at sea. It was common practice. And then if you walked the beach, you had these black feet. And a colleague of mine, he was a full captain, and equally so, a professor of international law. He was bringing a ship up the St. Lawrence River, and the pilot looked and said, "You're pumping out the debris from under the machine." And he said, "Yes, but cleaning this, doing it in the harbor costs 10 times as much. Now I will pay the fine of 40,000 Canadian dollars. The pilot said, "You were not careful enough. It will now cost you 2 million Canadian dollars. The law was changed a week ago." You see? Then states must also make clear that the illegal activity is not much cheaper than the legal one. You got my point?
Thank you, Professor.
Yes. Maria Daniela.
Good afternoon, Professor. My question is, can the mixed system be against the principle of equality? Sorry, can you hear me?
I hear you, but you must be closer to the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Can the mixed system be against the principle of equality? I mean, because I am from Ecuador, and having this both systems coexisting together in the country, it's been very difficult for us because some people and some groups are under this popular system, but it is not for everybody. So at the end of the day, we are like divided into groups because of these economic systems. So I don't know, maybe there are some good examples in other countries, but.
I believe that this is a misconception. Chile has no economic system as far as the Constitution is concerned, but your legislature has not lived up to the demands and the realities of Chile. That's are two. Therefore, to blame the constitution, you blame the wrong person. You see, there's not much more in this Constitution of Germany about, except this word, social state.
Mm-hmm.
And nevertheless, the legislature has done it differently.
Yes, without the word.
And here your legislature has not done so. Therefore, to be brutal, check what the political parties are offering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And don't believe that Germany has been run over the years more by Christian Democrats than by the SPD.
Okay.
By what you would consider conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But this doesn't mean that they're against social development.
Right.
It's a question of the culture of which you are following, and therefore it is the legislature, one side, and the culture within political parties, which has created the problem you're facing. And you can also look into the matter from a totally different point of view. Check who are the leaders of the CSU, the sister party of the CDU.
Okay.
Do you want to do it alone, or shall I explain to you? Most of the heads of the CSU come from a very, very low standard of the society.
Mm-hmm.
The present Minister of the Interior, you may like him or may not like him, his father was a simple, not even learned construction worker. And he himself has no big training. He has only what we call Volksschule, primary school, and perhaps not even finished. But he has both feet on the earth. He's typically Bavarian, that was therefore not to the liking to everybody in Germany. The Bavarians are different, sort of. They drink more beer than wine, that makes them very different. And they have a language which is occasionally a bit offensive. They always seem to be a bit aggressive.
I'm currently living in Bavaria.
Yeah.
So I know.
Come on, my family comes from Bavaria, I can say so. But I come from the Franconian part, that's something totally different. Be it as it may, what is essential for a good government or a good parliament, that you have a mix of people's social backgrounds. A parliament only consisting of professors would be the nightmare and the disaster of the state. It's not my opinion. It's the opinion of Plato. Plato tried to establish a government consisting only of philosophers. It was a total catastrophe. Therefore, what you need is a social exchange within political parties and later in parliament, and that they please take into account the needs of the country at large. The other problem you're facing in Chile, I don't want to speak about Chile, is you concentrate too much on Santiago de Chile. If you go, and you are not as bad as other countries. In Khartoum, they are over-concentrating on Khartoum and forget that there's the rest of the country. And therefore, they lose a contact to the reality of life. And what you should also do, what is part and parcel in our constitution, is that in Germany, every inhabitant should have at least nearly similar living conditions. This is easy for Germany, for we are not centralized. We are decentralized. That's a merit of our decentralization. You have much more problems in France. Perhaps it's not the answer you expected.
No, thank you. It's very well explained and the reality. Thank you.
If there is no further question, I suggest we can stop 5 minutes earlier. Is that okay? There's our host.
Yes, here I am. Well, thank you very, very much for your lecture, for your workshop today, and for planning so much time as well for conversation. I think it was well used. To everybody, we will have more parts of this workshop, and we can enjoy some more conversation with Professor Wolfrum in the next days. You've already seen this in the program, I guess. Now Mr. Wolfrum has another meeting, so I think it's fine to stop here. Thank you very much. And all of us, we will stop here and make a break for, well, a lunch break for those in Latin America. And we will meet back here in the same link at 2:30 in the afternoon, Chilean time. You have to calculate your own time. And we will use the same link, and you are very welcome if you come here earlier, for example, and you want to exchange some opinions or plannings, coordinations with your colleagues here, the other participants. You can do so on our platform. On WonderMe, there's a room organized for you where you can meet meanwhile you're waiting and the breaks and so on. I saw that some professors already gave you homework, so there you can meet as well and organize.
You won't
so thank you very much for your participation. Mr. Wolfrum, Professor.
You won't get homework from my side, therefore relax. But I'm not sure whether I can do the meeting on Wednesday, 28 from 5:30 to 7:30 on the constitutional system. I can do it in the remaining hour anyway. For I heard the speaker before me, he covered most of the things which I wanted to say. Therefore, but I will let you know after I've talked to my people who are organizing me. I'm in the hands of the government of Sudan, and therefore not totally free what I'm going to do.
Okay, so we will coordinate via email, I suppose, when you have clear indications by
yes,
by your timetable.
Okay, wish you a good afternoon for you, and we speak to each other. I will be with you again tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. So see you tomorrow, and see everybody soon after lunch.
Super. Oh, it
Bye,
was
Professor.
a pleasure with you.
Bye-bye.